Good up. I'm Rob Thomas and I'm the volunteer coordinator for Pest Free Kaipatiki. We are currently undertaking candidate interviews for the 2019 local government elections. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Melanie Kenrick and I'm standing for Kaipatiki on the local board, and this is my first time
Melanie,
standing,
great.
which is a bit daunting.
Oh, fantastic. Good on you for making the move.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've got some really simple questions to ask you. Feel free to answer what you want. Do you currently have a rat trap on your property?
I have several.
Great.
And a dog who's very effective at deterring rats.
Great, that's
Yes.
fantastic. And have you downloaded the EcoTrack app and do you use it?
No, I have to say I have a reputation of being slow on the technology uptake, but it is something I'd probably look at getting.
Great, well, we'll have to get you involved, get your kids involved in it.
Actually, if I get my kids to show me.
So, what do you like and dislike about the natural environment here in Kaipatiki?
Well, it's probably one of the reasons why we decided to live in this area. I mean, it's got absolutely beautiful bush. It's got the rainforest, the karis, the mangroves, the amazing coastline. The kids can go fishing. It's just an environmentally really rich area. So there's a lot of real positives, but and that because it is so expensive, it is quite difficult to manage. I can see that. I mean, it's an ongoing battle with the weeds. I think Auckland's got one of the reputations of being the weediest city in the world, and trying to get on top of that just with our natural environment is a challenge.
Do you think that there is a single biggest environmental issue that you think there is in Kaipatiki?
Probably the most serious is obviously the kari dieback, because we are one of the areas which have huge numbers of kari. I mean, we're in Kari Road, Kari Street, Kari Road. There's Kari Point. You know, there's this area is got a history with the kari tree. So if we lose that, then that's it's serious consequence. So yeah, that's definitely the most serious at the moment.
Now, is there any particular environment projects that you've been involved with, or anything that you've been particularly passionate about working in Kaipatiki?
Probably, I mean, there's some amazing people that do so much work, and I'd aspire to be like them one day. But I've ripped out a fair few moth plants. I do my bit with doing that, and I certainly, if I can't get to them all, I make sure I report them and let people know. So I do bits and pieces, but not as much as I'd like to.
That's great. Now, Kaipatiki is really fortunate to have this 32% tree canopy cover, and you've already talked a little bit about that. However, every day we hear these chainsaws and private properties. What is it that you do to maybe maintain it or help grow the canopy?
Well, speaking from personal experience of a next door neighbour who's just cleared away large amount of land, one of the things I think we need to do is be more proactive about putting some of the trees onto the protected tree register, because I've had a look at it sort of recently, and there's actually not that many trees from this area on that register, so I think that would be a good start. Also, part of it is educating people about the benefits of trying to maintain a tree tree canopy. I think that the local board can take a proactive role in doing some more intensive planting.
Great, fantastic. So Pest Free Kaipatiki is a community-led initiative, and obviously with the goal to make Kaipatiki pest free by 2026, very ambitious goal. This will require a significant coordination and resources to remove pest plants and predators and prevent this further spread of tree disease. If you were elected this term, what are your top 3 sort of tangible actions that you would like to support the 30 plus volunteer groups and reserves, schools, street coordinators to achieve that community vision?
I mean, there's probably a few, because I'm not elected, I sort of don't know all of the issues that they face, but I have had a chat to a number of the volunteers, and there are some simple things, like I know one of the coordinators was finding it really difficult because he only had one computer, and then his wife was having to do a whole lot of work because she does sort of charitable, sort of has her own involvements, And you know, just the little things like making sure that the coordinators are resourced so that they can actually do their job of coordinating. I'm not sure sort of how it works with the volunteers, whether they bring in their own sort of tools, but I'd imagine that would be an important thing, is if there are volunteers turning up, you want them to be able to have the best tools possible so that they're not, you know, sawing away on a blunt saw or properly resourced. And I guess the other thing is just really promoting so that we can try and get more volunteers into the, you know, coming through, rather than burdening it on just a few.
So both community volunteers and council contractors do ecological restoration and reserves. What are your current thoughts on how they coordinate, deliver, if any, and would you look to change anything in the future?
I mean, that's another question that's sort of quite difficult to answer, because I don't know sort of how they do work together. I don't know whether it's an absolutely beautiful working relationship or something that's a little bit sort of more shambolic. But it is one of those things that I can imagine there could be the potential for overlap, and it's about I guess responsibilities, and I'd want to be sort of elected to council before I could sort of more fully answer
I appreciate that. That's a good response anyway.
So Auckland Council recently adopted the draft regional pest management plan, so you may not have seen that or read about it, but many Kaipatiki residents don't believe that there's enough enforcement or teeth really when it comes to private property owners removing pest plants from their backyards. We also know that seeds generally travel more than 500 metres, and there's a buffer zone that they're talking about 500 metres from significant ecological areas. So do you agree or disagree that there's sufficient enforcement on private property? And do you agree with the 500 metre buffer zone? And what would you do, if anything, to address these issues?
I mean, I know for a fact that there's no enforcement because personal circumstances. I know that having had somebody sort of at the back of our property with a property that was covered in moth plant, it was, you know, there was nothing that we could do, and it came down to a number of volunteers going into the property and removing it. In terms of the 500 metres, I mean, you could have 500 metres or you could have 800 metres, but the point is that something's got to be actually. There's no point having a massive big increase in the enforcement in the zone if it's not going to be enforced. And so I guess for me, I'd want to know: are there any consequences for people having pests? You know, some of the pest plants in their properties. And if there's not any consequences, could we look at some? And is there actually any enforcement? And if there's not enforcement, then that's another thing that you've got to look at. What might that look like? So I don't really know the answers to the consequences or the enforcement, but
that's a good response. Yeah, fantastic. Just two more questions. So kauri trees are very familiar and beloved features of Kaipatiki. However, they're currently under threat, as you know, from kauri dieback, and you mentioned that before. Some people assert that the only way to protect kauri trees is keep people and animals away from the trees. Now, what is your opinion on this, and what would you do to protect our kauri?
I mean, I think that sort of Kaipatiki's been great in the way that our response has been really proactive. And that, I mean, we have got kauri dieback in sort of a small pocket, but by and large it's been kept out of the area, and I know that it has been sort of, the measures might be seen by some as being quite drastic, but I support the measures that have been taken in terms of closing a lot of the tracks, and I know unfortunately it's going to be for quite a long time. In terms of, it's one of those things when you've had a problem that's been sort of sitting there for quite some time, people sort of get a bit complacent, and so there is going to need to be sort of the ongoing education, particularly with visitors, especially with tourists who might have been walking out in the Waitakaris. You know, there's a lot of other areas which maybe don't have the same sort of protections in place. So we need to make sure that, you know, in terms of the locals, that we're all trying to effectively police or demonstrate what needs to happen to protect the area.
Great. And our final question is there anything else you want to tell us about any other environmental initiatives or part of your manifesto that you'd like to talk about?
I mean, I just love the fact that we've got so much going on in this area. Personally, I've got a passion. I'd love to see part of this. Our local area have a pest free fence, sort of similar to what they've got in Wellington, and sometimes that takes a 20-year vision to actually happen, and it needs sort of a lot of people to start talking about it, start discussing it. But we do have a few pockets around our Kaipatiki that could be quite easily turned into a sort of a pest free area, especially down at Curry Point, down by the Chelsea Heritage Park. So I think that would be great. And sort of even some of the in our urban areas, I love the idea of sort of the urban community gardens that we've got. And something I wanted to look up was, somebody told me, and I'm not sure if this is correct, is that apparently we've got the highest proportion of beehives for an urban area in Auckland, which I think is quite cool.
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, yeah, it was a beekeeper that told me. But I also love the idea of some of the bee pathways and the planting that goes on for those things. I think we've got to support the bees.
Well, I really appreciate you coming along tonight. Thank you so much for taking your evening out. And all the best for your election campaign.
Thank you.
Cheers.